You know, I think one thing that has happened, and well, several things have happened. Okay, the communication revolution, it was going to happen anyway, but it's an extraordinary thing. The fact that everybody has got a mobile phone, that it actually changes people in ways that we don't even begin to imagine. But it's a terrific thing. The growth of an aspirational group among, I would say, all classes. You know, people call it a middle class. I don't think it's just a middle class. I have seen, you know, young villagers in Andhra Pradesh, in Bengal, you know, who have different aspirations, who have a thirst for bettering their condition, and not just their own condition. And I think that's wonderful. Now, whether it would have not happened otherwise, these are counterfactuals that I can't answer, but yes, that's definitely another very important positive change that I see. And with that, the sense of mobility. Earlier, mobility was also associated often with distress, and there still is a lot of distress, migration, and so on. But the notion of mobility as a source of opportunity, I think, is a very important thing. Having said that, I think that the lack of change, or in a sense, the cementing of some very, very adverse kinds of social relations, is to me both a source of distress and a source of huge surprise. I would say, once again, communication, the telephone. It was, you know, it was such a prized item. You had to be in a very, very long queue. And often it would be, you may have been the lucky ones in your neighborhood who got the telephone, and then everybody else would come to make this call. And of course, it was a very scratchy line. A trunk call was this enormous thing. A trunk call is something that you did to another city. The city could be Jaipur, the city could even be Faridabad. But it was a trunk call. You had to book it in advance. You would wait for the time. You'd be sitting there, and you'd get exactly 3 minutes, and you'd be rushing to just sort of say anything you could in that 3 minutes. Sometimes it would get cancelled. So you'd have gathered all your family for that wonderful trunk call, and it wouldn't happen. So it's impossible to imagine it today, right? I think none of you could even imagine, for example, that you've gone to fetch somebody from the railway station, and the train is 4 hours late, which was very typical in those days. But there is no way you can let the family back home know that the train is 4 hours late, because there would be one phone booth in the entire railway station maybe, and mostly it was out of order, or there's a very long queue, or it's impossible to get through, or whatever. So you would basically keep waiting. And of course, maybe the 4 hours becomes 5, 6, 7, and you don't know, and the information doesn't get to you either. I think that is something none of you can imagine, because you'd all be sending your SMSs, that it just would not occur to you that there is such a lack of sort of basic communication. So that is a massive, massive change. There is one, I was trying to think when you said, what was it like, life in those days? You know, I don't want to sound like one of those old people who saying things are very good in the past. They were not. And they were also just as unequal and horrible. Okay? They were less brash, but they were also very unequal in a more feudal, maybe subdued way. But there was one thing I remember from my childhood, which I've often wished now we could bring back. And that was something called the guest control order. Now, this was basically when you had more than 100 people, you had to sign on for something called guest control, where you were not allowed to serve more than, I think, 4 items, and so on and so forth. And often, the worst thing you could say about somebody was that, oh, do you know, in his son's wedding, they really flouted the guest control order and nothing was done. Again, can you even imagine that today with the kind of lavishness we see for, you know, children's birthday parties? Forget weddings. We're not even going into the 5-day weddings thing. I must say, I wish for a little bit of that, if only because it just was a reminder to us, among the privileged, among the elite, that there should be some limits on your ability to just splash out on yourselves.